Guten Tag, IB Econ. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 4, the global economy. We're going to finish it up. We will be done with all of the review. This is concepts 7 through 10, and we're talking about developing nations and developing economies. But first, let's do our daily punishment. Did you hear about that cheese factory that exploded in France? There is nothing left other than debris. I kind of did not nail that joke. All right, for this, there is a lot of text heavy on this unit. There's really not a lot of graphs. There's no new math here. There's one graph, the poverty cycle graph, which you need to know. But this is very common. This unit is very common on the paper 2G that you have to do when they give you the documents and stuff. And you need to know background knowledge and your own ideas also. So this is very, very important of having the content to be able to write a good paper about this. All right, so there's a multidimensional nature of development. A basic definition of economic development is improvements in living standards of, or economic well-being or welfare. But development also focuses on people's freedoms, reduction in poverty, public provision of education, healthcare, and maintenance of law and order, and guarantee of civil liberties. So it is very multifaceted. All right, some of the sources of economic growth. We're going to talk about sources of economic growth first. Natural factors, increasing the quantity and qualities of the factors of production, increasing land areas, which Singapore and Holland have done, improving the production capabilities of land. Hong Kong has done that by building upwards, not outwards. Another source is human capital factors. This could mean increasing population through natural processes or increasing education. Physical capital and technological factors. This can be achieved by improving the quantity and or quality of physical capital. This would include things like building factories, machinery, shop offices, motor vehicles, and social capital. There's two key concepts for increasing physical capital. We have capital widening, where you increase the amount of labor, but the ratio of capital per worker does not change, so productivity will be the same. Or you have capital deepening, where you increase the amount of capital for each worker, like improvements in technology. This will lead to increased productivity. You also have institutional factors, such as banking systems, legal systems, good government, education, infrastructure, that all lead to economic growth and development. We mentioned sustainable development, and that is something you definitely need to know. Endless economic growth based on consumption of finite resource cannot continue indefinitely. The United Nations has made this a key issue with them. They've created the United Nations Sustainability Goals. You can get things called uneconomic growth, where you have an increase in production, but it comes at expense of resources and the environment. So there's 17 United Nations Sustainability Goals. You do need to know these. They have been on the IB exam before. They're seen as broad goals, and they're supported by specific targets and outcomes for each one. Countries are encouraged to adopt even more ambitious targets than the ones stated by the United Nations. Here are the 17 goals right here. I'm not going to read them to you, but you do need to know these. So we're going to talk about developing countries. They're called LDC countries or LEDC, same thing. Less economically developed or less developed countries. This list was created by Michael Tiardo about common characteristics. The first one is low standard of living, low income, inequality, poor health, and inadequate education. Number 2 is low levels of productivity, lack of physical capital. Number 3 is high rates of population growth and dependency burdens. So they tend to have a high CBR, and they have a high, the average dependency ratio is less than 20%. Number 4 is high and rising levels of unemployment and underemployment. You do need to know what both those terms means. Developing countries tend to have relatively high levels of unemployment and underemployment. Next one is substantial dependence on agricultural production and primary product exports. Number 6 is prevalence of imperfect markets and limited information. A free market can't exist if information isn't available to consumers. Number 7 is dominance and dependence and vulnerability to international relations. Developing countries tend to have poor terms of trade compared to developed countries. We're going to now talk about some differences, some diversity amongst LDC countries. The first one is resource endowments. Some countries just have more natural resources than others. Next one is historic background. Some countries are coming from decolonization, neocolonialism. Some are not. Some are geographic and demographic factors. Not all developing countries have large populations. Physical size can have an impact on developed level. Three of the four most populated countries are deemed developing: China, India, and Indonesia. Ethnic and religious breakdown. There's just a lot of diversity amongst that. Structure of industry. A lot of these countries do rely on primary sector industry, but some countries rely heavily on on trading exports to other countries. Bangladesh and Nepal are examples of those. Per capita levels. There's divergence between those. Countries that are getting close to developed nation status usually have higher per capita income. And political structures, like there's a huge amount of diversity. We're going to next talk about the indicators that are used to measure the economic development. We have single indicators and composite indicators. Single indicators are solitary measures that may be used to assess development. They tend to measure financial measures, education, or institutional measures. The most common one was GDP per capita or GNI per capita. Developing countries tend to have higher GDPs than they do GNIs, meaning money could be flowing out of their countries in the form of remittances. Remember, GNI per capita probably is more accurate looking at the quality of life of individuals, where GDP per capita focuses more on output. We have other things like financial measures. I've already mentioned GDP and GNI per capita. We have the Big Mac Index, which was created by Burger King, which allows countries to look at a comparative price of a Big Mac in different countries. We have health measurements like life expectancy, infant mortality, education measurements like expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling. We have economic social inequality measurements like income and wealth distribution, like the Gini coefficient. Energy indications like energy poverty, access to electricity, and environmental indicators. Given the multidimensional nature of economic development, it's hardly surprising that it's difficult to measure. Rather than using single indicators, most countries start to use composite indicators. They are usually more accurate. The most important one is the Human Development Index. This looks at GDP per capita, life expectancy, and average and expected years of schooling, so education, healthcare, and economic well-being. And it measures all of them, and it gets a score from 0 to 1. The higher you are, the higher developed you are. You do need to know the HDI, and you need to know how it's measured. Just in general, HDIs are generally considered better measurements. They are usually, however, only looking at a country as a whole, and they don't look at variations between regions and cities. This is the problem you have with all these indicators. They don't also always consider inequalities between rural, urban, men, women, or different ethnic groups. Some of the other additional indices are the Gender Inequality Index, the GII, which measures gender inequality in 3 aspects of life: reproductive health, measured by maternal mortality, adolescent birth rates, measured by proportion of and adolescent birth rates. The second one is empowerment, which is measured by the proportion of parliamentary seats occupied by females, and a proportion of adults and males ages 25 and older with at least some secondary education. So they look at education, health, and political involvement. We have the IHDI, which is similar to the HDI, but it takes into account human development, cost of inequality. We have the Happy Planet Index, which is really looks at sustainability and takes a big aspect into that. We have the MPI, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, which is another one you should know. This measures the impact of experience by poor people in countries by looking at three key areas: health, education, and standard of living. We have the Inclusive Development Index. This focuses on growth, development, and inclusion. We have the Inclusive Development Index. Again, it's useful when we look at how to measure countries and classify them to advanced economies and emerging economies. It allows us to make comparisons much easier. We also have the Genuine Progress Indicator, which tries to measure whether a country's growth, which is simply an increase in output of goods, has led to an improvement in the welfare of people. It looks at gross national income, figures GPI, adds in considerations like benefits of household work, parenting, and volunteer work. It tries to take a more holistic measurement. All right, this is the graph you need to know for this unit, and this has been on the IB exam before. You need to know the poverty trap or poverty cycles. There are barriers to development that are often interconnected in a cyclical fashion and self-perpetuate. In this poverty cycle right here, you have low levels of education. This leads to low income, low productivity, and low level of human capital. Since you have low income, low levels of saving, low levels of investment, low economic growth, low income. These are all interrelated with each other. They're all come back to low income. You need to know how to draw this, and you need to be able to analyze this. In general, there's greater inequality between the rich and the poor when you look at developing countries. High income inequality can be a barrier to growth and development. You have low levels of saving. The rich tend to dominate both politics and the economy, and large amounts of money leave the country. That's called capital flight, which you should know. Pro-poor growth occurs when the economic growth leaders tend to not be focused on economic equality. So how does a lack of access to infrastructure and appropriate technology hinder economic progress? We're going to talk about things right now that hinder economic progress. If you don't have infrastructure, it's going to, you don't have like telephones, you don't have roads, airports, sewage treatment. That's what connects the country. Another thing is lack of access to appropriate technology. Appropriate technology refers to people having the technology available to them that are appropriate for the level of development they're currently at. It's connected to both consumers and producers. Lack of access to education. Improvements in having lack of education leads to less human capital. Lack of role of women in society. There's a strong correlation between women's education and child survival rates and fertility rates. Lack of access to health. When education improves, there's also a direct improvement in the level of health in society. This is all still kind of connecting to health right now, to education. Lack of access to healthcare. Next topic. There's a strong correlation between healthcare and life expectancy, and you see this in HDI figures. Increased access to healthcare, especially when combined with increased educational opportunities, will improve levels of economic development. Health and education lead to long-term growth. If a country is dependent on a narrow range of exports, then they face greater vulnerability in the commodities market. If the price of their good goes down, it could lead to a crashing of their economy. It can make it very volatile. A lack of access to international markets can also hinder economic growth. Protectionist measures by developed countries against exports of countries may be very harmful. If it measures or prevents developing countries from utilizing their comparative advantage and exporting to developed countries, it's going to limit their economy. Small-scale farmers and the primary sector, the agricultural sector, will be hurt by this. It's going to lead to lack of access to global currencies and having a currency that's non-convertible. An informal economy can also hinder economic progress. This part of the economy is neither taxed nor administrated. Therefore, it's not included in a country's gross national income. It leads to lack of worker protection, lack of ability to tax, lack of money for the government, lack of good working conditions, low level of productivity. You need to know capital flight and how does that hinder economic progress. Capital flight is when large amounts of money leave the country, usually to political or economic turmoil. This is often seen in developing countries where hyperinflation can occur or security concerns as it relates to assets. Domestic capital that leaves a country could have been used internally to potentially to potentially help it grow. Capital flight also causes a depreciation of the currency as the supply of the domestic currency increases on the international market. You'd have an increase in supply, which causes the currency to depreciate. How does indebtedness impact economic progress? As with any loan, although there are short-term positives, in the long run, the amount of the loan must be repaid along with interest rates. This could keep a country in a cycle of debt and repayment and just higher and higher interests. Geography can hinder economic growth. Landlocked countries usually pay more and have to wait longer for imports to be delivered, and they also have problems exporting. Tropical climates and endemic diseases. Countries that are in the tropics tend to be less developed, and their geographical location is a factor in this. It does increase agricultural productivity, and disease can have a negative effect on their health and their health concerns. Weak institutional frameworks can also very much hurt a country. Having a lack of legal and property rights will prevent businesses from forming, from loans from being formed, from banks being formed, from people feeling secure enough to buy and sell assets. We call this sometimes dead capital. Dead capital are assets that cannot be easily bought, sold, valued, or used as an investment because no one actually owns them or has the right to exchange them. This is when you have a weak institution for legal and property rights. Lack of property rights traps people in developing countries into poverty. This is one of the big arguments for free market capitalism and the free market. You can have ineffective taxation systems where taxes can provide a big public benefit, especially for the poor. But if you have corruption or inefficient taxation, you might get regressive taxation or the government just like stealing the money. Banking systems are also very important. Banking systems tend to be controlled by commercial banks. Saving becomes difficult without access to official and reliable banking systems. In developing countries, poor people can find it almost impossible to gain access to traditional banks and financial systems since they lack assets to use as collateral. They're often unemployed and lack savings. This is why when we get to the next part, like things like micro banking and mobile banking are super important. Gender inequality can hinder economic progress. You get improvements in welfare through greater education and health standards. However, there are also extremely important externalities that occur when women become more empowered. When women are more empowered, it leads to well-being of their families improve, education for children improve, quality and quantity of the factors of production improve. Women are part of the workforce. Health of families increase, and it does eventually lead to lowering the rate of population growth. Political instability, unequal political power and status, government corruption, civil war, all of those lead to hindering economic progress. Corruption of any form reduces the effectiveness of a legal system. It can lead to unfair allocation of resources. Bribery costs businesses. It could hinder the attraction of foreign direct investment. It increases the risk of contracts not being honored. You can have a lot of regulations that could just prevent businesses from moving there or make it almost impossible for businesses to be formed. Monetary gains from corruption tend to not enter the formal economy, and corruption decreases the economic well-being of citizens. So now we're going to talk about strategies to achieve economic growth. This next part is how do we get economic growth for LDC countries. The first one is called import substitution. Import substitution is a strategy that developing countries should produce goods domestically rather than import them, and they should produce their own goods. So the government needs to subsidize them and support them. You do protectionist measures. Some of the advantages are that it protects domestic markets, it protects cultural and social habits, and it protects against multinational corporations. Some of the disadvantages is that it only works in the short run. Countries do not enjoy benefits from comparative advantage, so it is allocatively inefficient. It could cause high inflation due to increase in domestic consumption, and it could lead to tariff wars from other countries. Next one called export promotion. This is what the Little Tigers did in Asia. This is an outward-oriented growth strategy based on openness and increasing international trade and trying to make a product to trade with the rest of the world. You do this through liberalization of trade, free trade, floating exchange rate, investment in infrastructure that enables trade, and deregulation and minimal government involvement. Export-led growth through manufacturing and primary commodities look very different and have very different results. When we're talking about Japan and Taiwan and South Korea, those are technology export countries. But like in the primary sector for agriculture, that is not always as good. And it's more in danger of, like, if there's a decrease in price of wheat or something like that for the whole economy collapsing, there's usually less diversification in the agricultural sector. So, yeah. So advantages for economic integration: it leads to regional cooperation. Large markets tend to lead to diversification. Companies will benefit from larger markets. If free movement is possible, workers are able to seek higher paying jobs. Greater efficiency due to increased competition, and it leads to trade creation. Disadvantages is inward-looking economies. You get inward-looking economies due to larger markets, complication of trade due to multiple agreements, increased unemployment, and less efficient companies lose to businesses that have already developed economies of scale, and you get trade diversion. The next thing we're going to talk about is diversification and how that could help with economic growth. Diversification is the aim to move from production and export of a primary commodity and replace these with the production of export of manufactured and semi-manufactured products. So this is trying to go from a primary economy to an industrial economy. High tariffs on finished goods have resulted in developing countries being unwilling to invest in needed infrastructure to create them. So protectionism can really hurt LDC countries from trying to become diversified. We're next going to talk about market-based supply-side policies and how they can lead to economic growth. Trade liberalization. We talked about a lot about trade liberalization and how that helps with economic growth. Privatization is the sale of public government-owned firms to the private sector. It's argued that the privately owned profit firms will be more likely to maximize profits. It'll lead to higher employment. Privatization requires a national regulatory system that is lacking in developing countries. So if you don't have the government to do this, you can't do it. You also get different incentives for a private company and the government. Other market-based ones are deregulation. This is when the government will get rid of some like laws that are regulating parts of the economy. Examples of regulation are like environmental laws, health and safety laws, worker hours, stuff like that. Deregulation is you get rid of some of those laws and you make it easier for businesses to operate. We call this sometimes cutting red tape, reducing taxes, getting rid of some regulations. Foreign direct investment can also help developing countries. Foreign direct investment is long-term investment by private multinational companies in countries overseas. This is done through building new plants and expanding existing ones. MNCs are attracted to developing countries for a number of reasons. They're rich in natural resources. They have growing markets that are access to larger potential consumer bases, low cost of labor, and less governmental regulation. Some of the pros of this are filling the savings gap, and it fills the savings gap and leads to economic growth. It provides employment, training, and education. It leads to invest in research and development. It increases employment, and it may lead to the multiplier effect. Host countries will gain tax revenue, and it improves local infrastructure. Here are some of the disadvantages. Usually the jobs are low skilled, and MNCs bring in their own management. They gain tax advantages within the country and wield a large amount of political power. So a lot of times MNCs will be given tax breaks. And they have a lot of political power, so that's a disadvantage. There's transfer pricing where MNCs sell their products to themselves. MNCs tend to go where regulation is weak and take advantage of the situation. taking advantage of raw resources and damaging the environment. And a lot of times they repatriate these profits. So social enterprise are organizations that have social objective as their primary goal. When we talked about micro banking and microfinancing was done by Muhammad Yunus, who won a Nobel Peace Prize in economics. Like we said before, people in developing countries, if you don't have assets to use as collateral, or if you don't have a savings, banks won't give you loans. So he created this small banking system where they would give poor people small loans, like of $50. There was very little interest, if none. It was trying to help poor people with like creating like small businesses, like usually like, stands and stuff like that. And it was meant to raise people in like poor countries that didn't have access to like, commercial banking, some kind of loans. It's been very successful. It's a great idea. It's really helped out in LDC countries. The next one is mobile banking. With the creation of the internet and the internet being widely available, even in LDC countries, people are able to bank on their phones now. They're able to use the bank on their phones. And this has led to the creation of small companies as well. These two things are really huge. IB thinks these are such big things that they've actually done an essay on these topics before, just these two things. How can institutional change impact the economic growth? Improve access to the banking system, increase women's empowerment. We've already talked about ways that women's empowerment could help society. And we just talked about banking. Reducing corruption. Corruption limits the ability of government to grow. They often misspend how the money is. It leads to the lack of development of infrastructure. The government is not using the money the right way, so aggregate demand will not increase or might not increase. So doing institutional reforms could lead to long-run economic growth. Structural reforms in government, in law, in education, in healthcare, things like that. So like promoting security and property rights and land rights. We already talked about that. Having secure legal reforms. These are examples of like really important secure legal reforms that LDC countries should focus on. We could talk about interventionist strategies, how they could help LDC countries. These are where the government does get involved. Could be like government help for the poor, like some kind of minimum wage, some kind of like unemployment benefits, social security, helping those that live in poor areas, increasing factors of production, increasing infrastructure. Right here's a chart. I'm not going to read it, but this goes over like challenges and strategies. Transfer payments can also impact economic development. However, it is kind of hard just because a lot of these countries don't have the infrastructure to do a transfer payment. You can do a conditional cash transfer, where this is a transfer payment targeting low-income people with the aim of reducing poverty by making welfare programs conditional upon the actions of the person receiving money. So it may include school attendance, vaccinations, or regular doctor visits. This is something they do in LDC countries. It has been proven to be successful. Minimum wage is a thing you can do to try to help out. Trying to establish a wage that's a living wage. Many countries have minimum wage, but in LDC countries, they're not always enforced and they're not always living wages. Minimum wages in theory can lead to employers being unwilling to hire more workers, and then they would, as they would in a truly free market. This is one of the arguments against minimum wage. Minimum wage must not be discounted, but its effectiveness is limited by the size of the informal sector and the existence of noncompliance. Does the country have good structural government? How could merit goods promote economic growth and development? Merit goods are underprovided in a market, but they provide tremendous private and external and social benefits. So countries that provide merit goods like healthcare and education could lead to increase in human capital and long-run aggregate supply shifting, increase in potential growth. How might foreign aid help countries? Foreign aid is the assistance that is given to countries that would not have been provided by normal forces. Reasons countries provide aid or organizations do: to help people who have experienced some form of natural disaster or war, help developing countries achieve economic development, fill the savings gaps that exist in developing countries, improve the quality of human capital, of human resources, strengthen institutions, improve levels of technology, fund specific development projects, and help meet sustainable development goals. Foreign aid is tied in with also like humanitarian aid. This is given to save the lives of people suffering in response to emergencies. It's normally considered short-term in nature, but can expend. We have development aid. This is given by various organizations and countries to alleviate systematic poverty and promote economic, social, or political development. Development aid is usually more long-term. And we have usually government assistance. This is where the government aid that promotes specific targets for economic development for different countries. This is given by the United Nations and its allied organizations. So evaluating foreign aid, the distribution of aid needs to be done in a systemic way that promotes the ideals surrounding the purpose of the given aid. Aid is sometimes connected to political reasons and there are strings attached. Tied aid is when a country is given the money for a particular aid project on the condition that the recipient country uses the money to buy goods and services from the donor country. While the short-term aid might be essential to protect the population, the long-term aid can harm the domestic industries by driving down prices if there's strings attached or if it's a tied aid. Aid is often tied to adopting certain policies that might favor the country that's willing to give them. Sometimes maybe like the sustainability goal, so it's not always necessarily a bad thing though. Though aid may be needed at times to the potential recipient, repayment of the aid could leave a country in worse conditions than before they received the aid, especially if they're in a cycle of keep getting aid. All right, non-governmental organizations, NGOs vary in different ways, but we could say in a general priority is they're a business. They have some kind of goal that is not related to making profits. A nonprofit organization, they're not trying to make money. They're trying to work on a humanitarian ideal. The two main types of activities is they do operational activities where they plan and implement specific targeting projects in developing countries. They do advocacy activities is where they try to influence public policy in areas such as poverty reduction, workers' rights, human rights, and the environment. Problems with NGOs like Amnesty International, Red Cross, YMCA, they're all NGOs. They can be politically or religiously motivated. They're not always efficient or effective in their operations. And they spend more money on their administration than to the direct help within the field. We're almost done. We're going to talk about multilateral assistance, how it can contribute to economic growth. Multilateral assistance could be like a multilateral organization like the World Bank, which is made up of the International Monetary Fund. And the International Monetary Fund is a separate thing, But you have the World Bank and the International Bank for Reconstruction and the International Development Agency. You also do have the International Monetary Fund. That's the next slide. The World Bank provides financial support and technical assistance to developing countries with the purpose of reducing poverty. They give out loans generally focused on smaller scale projects that aim to directly target and benefit the poorest people, specific regions. We have the International Monetary Fund. There we go. It works to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, and facilitate international trade. It promotes higher employment and sustainable economic growth and tries to reduce poverty around the world. You need to know the International Monetary Fund. Some of the responsibilities of the IMF are as it promotes international monetary cooperation. It facilitates the expansion of balanced growth of international trade, promotes exchange stability, assists the establishment of multilateral system of payments, makes resources available to members experiencing balance of payment difficulties. The IMF will give out loans. They usually do have strings attached. The strings attached are usually financial measures they have to adopt to become more financially stable. And last thing we're going to talk about is debt relief. How can debt relief contribute to economic growth and development? Debt relief, if a country just forgives the debt, can free up resources for social spending. It can boost social spending. It reduces debt services and improves debt management. Within developing countries, more than 10% of their revenues are being used to pay for interest on the money they have borrowed. So debt relief is a serious solution. Just obviously, if you're a country that made out a loan, you probably do not want to do it. All right, guys, that is our last video, and that's the last thing to review. I hope this has been super helpful. Good luck on the IB exam. I believe in you. You're going to do awesome. And we are finally done. Until next time, deuces. Deuces, yeah.